Welcome, everybody, back to the Fide World Cup and Fide Women's World Cup coverage. Grandmaster Robert Hess. Alongside me today, a familiar face, a friendly face, Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. Danya, I'm happy to be joined by you today.
I'm nervous. I've never done World Cup commentary before, and I've never done commentary with you before. No, just kidding. It's great to be commentating with you, Robert. I'm super excited. Lots of things are going to be decided today, so yeah, I can't wait.
You know, nothing too important, just the Women's World Cup, first place, potentially being decided today, if not for Goryachkina striking back. But it's just a casual day at the office.
Is there
right?
anything else at stake, or is that it?
There's also a trip to the finals over in the World Cup, but we'll get to that in a bit. First, let's remind everybody who may be new or just for somehow forgetting the format of this event. It's been a fun ride. You've been covering most of it, and well, we only have 4 players remaining in the World Cup, 2 in the Women's World Cup, plus the third place match. And Danya, 90 minutes for the first 40 moves, 30 minutes added after move 40 with the 30-second increment starting from move 1. Familiar time control to most.
Indeed. And time has been a pretty big factor in some of these games. Yesterday, we saw in Alexandra versus Alexandra, we saw an incredible affair, epic battle, topsy-turvy, and time was playing a role. There was a time scramble. There were 2 time scrambles. And in Fedosseev Kryakin, time does not play a role because both of them have played really, really fast. So these matches have different characteristics. They have different tenors, which really is what makes this tournament so fun to watch. You get to watch so many different types of matches with their own personalities at the same time.
And as we return, we can see the players on screen here getting ready to start their games, make move 1. And some very focused players, Danya, in particular, Alexandra Goryachkina. She needs to win with those black pieces. And we can see world champion Magnus Carlsen looking a little calmer. He doesn't have as much to prove today as the games get underway. Duda looks right at you, Danya. That's what he's doing right there.
And both of them taking off their blazers to reveal white shirts. That was a pretty funny moment. Synchronized removal of outerwear. And Magnus generally likes to be fashionably late, but here he arrived a minute early. So I don't know what that will portend. And you mentioned Sasha Goryachkina and what she has to do. And, you know, insofar as there is an art to winning with the black pieces on demand, you don't want to play e4, a6. You don't want to do anything insane. You want to let the chance come to you. Obviously, the opening choice is very important. You also don't want to play the Berlin. But we will get to that once we take a look at her game. Let's begin with the board of the world champion as we see e4 on the board.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. And well, I've been watching a bunch of Olympic contests. Last night was table tennis. And the synchronized
some of that.
The synchronized blazer being taken off, not quite involved yet. And the IOC needs to take a look at that. That seemed like I would probably give that one an 8. It didn't exactly seem like they were together on that one. They were doing their own thing, but I think we need to take a look.
All right. Well, let's start with Magnus. Let's see how quickly they play out all of the Rai Lopez theory and which line they'll choose, and then we'll jump around a little bit because it does seem like there might be some interesting theoretical battles here. Carlsen is making motions to play the Marshall Gambit. He has not played d6 yet, which means that after c3, he is likely to play d5, which remains a stalwart weapon. Nothing's been proven in it. And here we see the anti-Marshall a4.
Yes, because I don't think Duda, he's looking here to get into these adventurous waters. He'd probably rather a solid game where he can maintain a slight edge, and if a draw happens, it's a draw. They move on to the tie breaks. Of course, a draw match being a great result for Duda against Carlsen. Would you say you'd agree with that, Donna, that he's trying to avoid the sharpest theoretical lines and just things where he could go wrong and give Magnus a victory with the black pieces?
Absolutely. I honestly don't think he really minds a draw because, you know, Duda is a great rapid player. It's not like, he believes his chances in the rapid, I think, are greatly reduced. Of course, Magnus is the favorite, but he's also the favorite in classical. And, I said this yesterday, drawing the world champion twice, there are worse things that you could be doing with your time than making draws with the world champion in classical games.
That is a very fair statement. I would have to agree with that. And well, with the white pieces here playing a4, he's already attacking this pawn on b5. And it asks black a reasonably difficult question because the main line continues with bishop to b7, but plenty of people play b4. So it really depends on your style of how you want to play here for black, because b4 takes away the c3 square. So the knight on b1 looks a little bit silly for the moment, but it hands white the c4 square, which can be important. And also often white plays the move a4 to a5 to keep that b4 pawn away from another pawn, giving white the a4 square, potentially for the bishop to go there. And so it's just an interesting start to this game where you may wonder, why are the players stopping to think? Don't they know every single move inside and out? There are different variations that are approximately equivalent in value. You just want to choose the trajectory of the game that you think, one, your opponent didn't specifically study for this particular day, and two, just what might give you the chances that you want. And for Magnus, he may say, let me just make a draw with black, or he may say, let me keep some fight left in this game and try to beat Duda with black. So Danya, you're the prophet. What attitude do you think we're going to get from Magnus today?
I absolutely don't think he really minds a tiebreaker. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the game will end in a draw. I just don't think he's going to do anything to force anything. Now, how do I know that? Because the Marshall has sometimes it's misperceived as a very aggressive line where you're trying to win at all costs. But in reality, modern theory is so well developed. The Marshall originally was formulated by Frank Marshall as a weapon to play for a win uncompromisingly in the Ruy Lopez. But as theory has become more developed, forced draws were found. And now, if you want to draw with white and your opponent plays the Marshall, as I can shamelessly report, I played a game against Ding Liren in the Pro Chess League, and he played the Marshall, and I went into it, and there's a lot of lines where white basically forces a draw. There is some uncertainty, but the fact that Magnus didn't mind going for it tells me that he doesn't mind a draw if that's where the theory leads. And the fact that Duda plays the anti-Marshall, that's pretty admirable. I think he's not going to go for an easy theoretical draw.
And Magnus just slid the rook over to b8, so he doesn't play bishop b7 or b4, the two most popular moves in the line, instead going rook to b8, which also makes perfect sense. And I wonder, Danya, is d7 to d5 out of the equation in the near future? It always has to be thought about, and you have to wonder, is the e5 pawn that can be captured? That's typical Marshall play where you give up that pawn on e5 for the quick development and a potential attack. But I'm wondering, you said you think Magnus may just be fine making a draw. If both players are fine making a draw, this game could be over before our very special guest joins us in just a few hours. So that's what everybody should be excited for, is we have a guest that you haven't seen on this show before. A very familiar face, someone that you respect, seen a lot of his chess games. We won't reveal the name just yet, but hopefully,
absolutely not.
Hopefully these two players are duking it out by the time he joins us.
Not a chance. We are not saying the name, but it'll be worth it, Robbie. It's not like one of those things your dentist says, there's good news and bad news. What are the good news? Oh, you're going to see you got it 6 months. What are the bad news? Oh, you got a cavity. Oh, all right. Thanks for saying it that way. This is actually a really good guest, and I'm looking forward to it. But
good doesn't
keep everybody in suspense.
It's a great guest, and we've had many great guests on the shows thus far. So just something to be excited for.
Indeed. Yeah. And just I wanted to throw this in before I forgot. I thought you made a good point about d5, whether it's out of the equation. I have played the anti-Marshall a couple times, and I never know when d5 is still a threat. I think it's really funny. I'm always afraid to make a move like d3. Like, what if my opponent plays d5 and sacrifices the pawn? I won't know the theory, and I'm going to get mated. So yeah, anyways, just felt the need to throw that in.
It's important to throw that in because I'm not super familiar with the nuances of these rook b8 lines versus some of the others, but it's clear that Magnus, he's avoiding immediate trades. He's also putting that onus back to Duda, saying, well, I'm going rook b8, which is the third most popular move from the previous position. So now you have to decide, have you studied up on your lines? Do you recognize the difference with playing a bishop b7 right away versus this rook b8 line? Is there something that black has available to him here that he doesn't had he not played rook b8? These decisions are really difficult, especially when you're playing the world champion, where there's already some natural fear when you sit down at the board. But Duda, of course, has beaten Magnus. He ended his long unbeaten streak. So maybe he's not as afraid as most people, but still, you're playing Magnus Carlsen, who seems to be in great shape throughout this World Cup.
No, it's always in the back of your mind. It really always is. And you mentioned the third most popular move, and I'll take this opportunity to show how you could have known that, how you could have pretended to be Robert Hess for a second. I mean, we know everybody wants to be, and you can see using the very nifty opening explorer tool, you can see the name of the opening, Morphe Defense, anti-martial variation, and you can see the number of games reached per position together with the listing of moves and the attendant number of games by popularity. Nifty little tool here. You can see Rook B8 is far from the most popular move. It finds 100 games, and same goes for white. So if you want to be totally aware of the opening developments, and if you want to combine entertainment with learning about the opening using this nifty tool, you can see all of the moves and all of the popularities and follow along. All right. And I don't feel bad at all talking about this in this way, because this is a great tool, and it really does help people follow stuff. This isn't, I'm not trying to sell anybody anything. I promise. This is genuinely a good way to follow and learn about the opening.
Well, it also is how the pros do it, right? When we are getting ready for games and we're looking through openings, we see, okay, Duda plays this line. He tries to avoid the marshal. What moves can I play that he may not expect? And you look down the list. Oh, wait, Rook B8, that's the third most popular move. Probably not something that he's dived into nearly as much, if at all, like the other two. And then he has to figure out those differences at the board, which, as we see happening at the moment, gives Magnus an early lead on the clock. Duda may be facing some uncertainty, some nerves, the chance to make the candidates. This event, if we're, I think, being honest, this event is much more important for Duda than it is for Magnus Carlsen. Magnus just wants to win another chess tournament. He's done everything you can do in chess. He's the world champion. He's the highest rated for so long. For Duda, this is his first trip to the candidates on the line. He wants to face off for the world championship. He wants that opportunity. So the nerves have to be all in Duda's corner. And Magnus like, just another day, just another chess game. I'm going to have some fun.
Yeah, I wonder if he actually thinks that, and he must. I mean, it must get easier with time. You win over and over and over again. Although, of course, the effects of any loss are magnified greatly, no pun intended. Yeah, it has begun 11 minutes into the podcast.
Oh boy. It's fine. I was just going to say, I just saw some developments in the Magnus game.
Okay, we can take a quick look at those.
I don't want to even go into specifics, but if you look at the top right of our screen, the four-board view, it is a marshal-like structure. It was a pawn sacrificed by Magnus, and because he put the rook on b8, he didn't have to worry about captures on b5, so he has sacrificed a pawn for the activity.
Right. That's really interesting. So it's like a souped-up marshal where, white's got the A file, but the A file doesn't seem particularly relevant in a position like this. And you might see bishop d6 and queen h4, and you might see the contours of the mainline marshal. I wonder how this will reflect on the course of the game, whether the A file will influence how black handles this position. But anyways, No,
I was saying, and one of the questions is, who does it benefit to have those pawns traded? Sometimes it actually benefits black because you have pawns stuck on the A file that, isn't very good for black. So anyway, that was just something I wanted to point out.
We can take a quick look before we go on our first break at the further developments in the Magnus game. And we do see them following the main contours of the marshal. Bishop d6, rook e1, as if nothing had happened on the queen side. Queen h4, g3, queen h3. And now I think there's rook e4. And there's probably, I'm already forgetting what the other move is. But perhaps I can use, there's queen f3, bishop e3. White has a bunch of moves in a position like this.
Yeah, and it does look like we're just in the normal martial lines, and no martial lines are truly normal. Black's down a pawn, there may be a mate on the board in a few moves, or sometimes they somehow trade queens that just equal. Like, I never quite grasp the ins and outs of the martial, but rook e4 is a move that's often played. As you said, bishop e3 is sort of the tamer approach, just putting your bishop out, developing and trying to defend squares preemptively. And queen f3, those are the queen trade lines that somehow white tries for, but that can be scary, inviting bishop g4 and the light squares in front of white's king. can be in some real danger. So I'm curious to see how this one develops.
Yeah, Jan Shistov has been so impressive, and he's one of those guys who, it's not that he's not often talked about. I wouldn't say that, but there's a certain sense in which he flies under the radar a little bit. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but but he's incredibly consistent actually, and he has been for so many years. And he's a very, nobody likes to play him, and I mean that in the best possible way. Not, of course, because of anything personality related. He's incredibly nice, and he's a consummate professional, but he's also a professional in the way he plays. He never gives up games easily, and even for his level, he's just wildly consistent.
Well, I would say the quote unquote issue with somebody like that is when you're young and you're crossing 2,700, everybody expects the path will just continue, that because you gained 50 points the year before, that you're going to keep gaining 50 points. And, oh, Duda is not, nearly 2,800, and that's somehow is a failure on his part. No, it's just very difficult to increase your rating while at that level. And he did get to 2,750. He did drop back down to 2,720s, but he's on his way up. I think he's in the best form of his entire life, and he hasn't lost a single game here in the World Cup. So he's just proving that he's here, and he's probably here to stay. And in the quicker time controls, he's really dangerous. In the classical time controls, he's also extremely sharp. And he just played the move you called for, rook to e4. And if I'm not mistaken, Danya, g5 is typically the response here because the pawn can't be captured.
Yeah, g5 is the response, and that's a prophylactic move, which masquerades under the guise of some crazy idea. It's actually not crazy. You're stopping rook h4. And if bishop takes g5, I believe that this is bad because there's two undefended pieces, and the queen can drop back to f5 and attack both of them. And they're in the most awkward spots. You can't defend both at the same time. So of course g5 is a pretty serious weakness of weakening Black's king side, but it's far more important concretely to keep the queen ensconced on h3.
Right, and g5, risky move, and if Magnus doesn't know the ins and outs of this martial theory, then that could be problematic for the Black king. But on the flip side, that g pawn can actually be very useful up there for some kind of impending attack, taking away the h4 square, kicking that rook out of the center, and then trying to take over the light squares. This is a problem when you have a fianchetto pawn structure, but no bishop in the fianchetto. You want that bishop on b3 to go right back over to the h1, a8 diagonal, but that takes a lot of time, whereas Black is looking to bring that bishop from c8 out to f5 or to g4 and hopefully into f3 at some point and cause White some serious damage.
Indeed, shall we say Black is trying to marshal his forces.
I approve. I very much approve of that one because it was really on point and it wasn't forced.
Right, because I meant to say that anyway. I think I'm beginning to learn what makes a good pun. I meant to say that anyway, and I just changed, the verb to be martial. So after g5, you often see the rook or the exchange being sacrificed on e4. So, for example, and again, I don't think this is actually what's going to happen, but sometimes you'll see this situation, and White will simply leave the rook hanging on e4. So don't be surprised if this happens. And the reason behind this, so not knight f3, to play queen f3, something like this occurs, and when you give up your light squared bishop, that bishop is crucial for exploiting, as you said, the weakness of these squares that have been weakened by the move g3. And without the bishop, it's quite a bit harder to exploit the lack of a fianchettoed bishop on g2. So that's just one of many, many subtleties which influence the course of the game. But Magnus is currently thinking probably g5 is not the only move recently, and particularly in this position, there might be other ways to treat this position. But g5 has been played.
Yeah, he goes for g5. He knows the main tenets of this position. And for Duda, who's down on the clock, I can't quite determine if I should be concerned for him because these positions can get quite sharp and he's down on the clock, or if he was just spending his time to make sure he could get to this position. And psychology plays a huge role in chess. And just because someone's spending time does not mean that they're unfamiliar with the position. In fact, sometimes they're kind of goading you into saying, wait a sec, if my opponent's spending time here, maybe I should play the sharpest stuff because they don't seem to know it. And then they're really just salivating at the opportunity. They're just putting their hands together, being like, okay, here we go. We're getting to these really crazy lines where I can actually show my stuff. So I don't quite know from Duda's perspective which of the two mindsets he currently has.
Yeah, it is. It is hard to say. And another thing that is often not talked about is, well, there's two things. First of all, these players have to remember a tremendous quantity of files and lines. And in an opening as sharp as this, you might have prepared something very similar. Maybe Duda had this position at home without the A file being open, and he's trying to determine, well, does this influence how I'm so, like, let's say he remembers the file with the A file closed. He's trying to compare, and that's a very dangerous thing to do when you assume that something doesn't matter. We've seen a lot of games like that where a tiny detail, which doesn't seem important, all of a sudden becomes crucially important. 15 moves down some lines. So he might be doing a bunch of different things, and we really don't know.
Right. And he could be determining, hey, do I want to put my queen on f3, like Danya was highlighting before? Do I want to put queen f1 and offer an early queen trade? Which kind of game am I looking for here? And after queen f1, I don't think black really wants to trade queens being down a pawn, but sometimes you just trade queens to say, I have plenty of competition because my development is quicker. I already have more minor pieces out. I'll throw my bishop out next, and I should be able to neutralize your advantage of material with my quick development.
Yeah, we see in the modern treatment of the Marshall, something that would be unthinkable in Marshall's day. A lot of players go into an endgame like this. And that mimics the shift I was talking about, where originally the Marshall was played as, it was marketed as the sharpest lane. Play the Marshall if you need to win in the Ruy Lopez. Follow in the footsteps of, the great attacking player Frank James Marshall. Now it's billed as more of a solid line because everybody knows the theory. Everybody knows how to not get mated. So yeah, bishop h3, king g1, and for example, rook b8, and everybody can see the kind of compensation we're talking about here. This is pretty terrifying, even if the computer always gives some advantage for white here, as it does here.
Right. You have to
maybe
play precisely, though, to maintain that advantage. It's always the struggle.
Like take stakes and bishop e3. Maybe this gives a little something. And then knight d2. But
I would
prefer, didn't like that.
I would prefer to have white's position there up a pawn. But yes, somehow this is what the top players do, is they enter an endgame down a pawn and just hold without any difficulties.
All of the other positions are super unbalanced and super interesting, including Magnus's position. So let's quickly check into the World Champions game. And I want to discuss and get your thoughts on whether black should, in fact, take on f1, because that's happened. We were discussing this hypothetically. Now it's happened on the board when f1 has been played. Should Carlsen take and go bishop h3?
Oh, gosh. Now you're putting me on the spot trying to predict the moves of a world champion. So one of the key things here is the queen is defended on h3. So if I am allowing a queen trade, do I want to initiate it by capturing on f1, or do I want to wait for white to take on h3? So the reason I bring that up is maybe I could make a use move like pawn h6 just to defend that pawn on g5, saying you really want to trade queens, you'll take me, my bishop will land out there. But there's a major difference, right? If you play h6 and the queen is traded, black's rooks don't get to go to e8 as well. White gets a move in between, whereas in the line that you had mentioned earlier, Danya, where you force the trade, by capturing on f1, then playing bishop h3 check, you get to, instead of playing h6, maybe your time is better spent moving your rooks to e8. So it's a big question right now. I'm sort of delaying my answer because I'm trying to think about it while I'm talking. Not the easiest feat, I might add, but I'm thinking about it here where I don't really want to trade queens, if I'm being honest. Like, I would prefer not to trade queens, but I don't also want to retreat, because where's my queen going to go to? Let's say a queen to h5. That looks like a very good move, trying to get my bishop into h3. That allows bishop to d1 potentially with tempo. And now white's kicking black's forces back, and even though bishop d1 looks awkward, we talked about that diagonal, right? The h1, a8 diagonal. My bishop is getting closer to the king side. My king feels a lot safer, and whatever attack black thought that he was going to get, well, toss that out the window. I don't see any attack.
Yeah, bishop d1 is you see that actually not so uncommonly in the Marshall. And yeah, while you're delving deep into the position, thinking about the nuances and subtleties, I'm just thinking about puns. Yeah, I was thinking about, Magnus's name is made, the first part of it is made into, it's pretty easy to make into a pun. It's often magnified. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking of whether any kind of pun material exists with the last part of his name, Gnus. But the only thing I can think of is there's a Russian word gnusny, which means something like heinous. But then I decided to abandon that.
Well, that describes your puns very well. So I'm glad you translated that for me.
Absolutely. So see, that's what I occupy my time with.
So you're saying if I don't like your puns going forward, I just say your puns are noose?
They're gnusny, yeah. They're something like that.
Okay, got it.
Well, it's G followed by an N, just like his name.
Yeah, so it's perfect. I'm glad you taught me that word.
Yeah, see, now you can really find your way in the Moscow metro by repeating the word heinous. Yeah. All right. So, but to your point, I agree, and the way you've explained it, at first I thought, black can take and go bishop h3 and black is fine, but now I think black is worse, and it's not the kind of it's a pretty concerning worse. And in this position, how exactly does white keep control of the e-file? I think a lot depends on whether white can maintain an advantage in this position. So what move did you have in mind here? Is it knight d2?
Probably.
Yeah, what can happen in this position, let's say black plays f5. You mentioned this earlier. It's a situation where to an untrained eye, it might seem like black is doing amazing. Rook is coming to e1, it's mate. But now you see knight f3, and if black has to go g4, this bishop gets locked in, then knight e5 happens, white sacks the pawn back. You might get a really, really nasty endgame. Of course, I'm throwing out a lot of moves here, but...
No, but your point is very well taken, because black regains the material that was sacrificed earlier, that martial gambit. Gambit a pawn, you have it back, but the resulting position is just clearly favorable for white, even if black will have chances to hold the balance. So those positions actually can be even worse sometimes than those active counterplay, down material, but all your pieces are flying in. So these are really difficult decisions, and Magnus is already slightly below Duda on the clock. He will have to think hard here trying to figure it out, because another important question, Danya, is, well, how many pieces does black want to trade? Because you're down a pawn. So do I want 2 pairs of rooks on the board, just 1 pair? Do I want to trade some of the minor pieces or leave them all on the board? What if things start going south? What material do I want left that will maximize my chances of holding the game? And that's actually what you have to have in the back of your mind. Not that you have this pessimistic attitude, oh, I might lose this game, but you need to make sure that if all else fails, if your attack doesn't work out, that if your queen is pushed back or the queens are forced off the board, how can I ensure that I'm not just going to lose this game? I'm down a pawn. And a pawn is a lot at this level. So another idea that just popped in my head, this is actually a Danya type of line. What about rook a8 here?
Oh, what a move. That's an incredible move. And the idea, wow. Check. He has taken the queen, by the way.
I don't know if it's good, but I was just looking at it.
You can still do it.
Yeah, instead of going rook e8, what if I bring my rook to a8?
So he could still do it here, right? Rook a8 takes, bishop h3.
Right.
So now I'll probably take the opportunity to centralize my king. But you're embarking on a completely different, the GPS is showing a different freeway. You're going to a1. You're no longer trying to infiltrate down the e file. And
I've also removed the guard of your knight on b1, so watch out for bishop f5.
Love it. Yeah, bishop f5, and all of a sudden, white's starting to feel very uncomfortable about these undeveloped pieces. Ooh. Now I'm curious, wait, what did he do after queen f1, king f1? Because Magnus has gotten up.
Can we get a little telescope or something? I'll settle for binoculars, but
look at that camera work.
I still don't know what he did, though.
I feel like he just didn't make a move. He just took the queen.
Oh, he didn't make. Yeah, it's Magnus' turn.
Am I hallucinating? It is Magnus. Okay, so that's the Magnus took the queen and got up, which is rare. You don't usually get up when you make a move that it involves a forced response by your opponent, right? But when you gotta go, you gotta go.
and you made our producers do extra work, so thank you for zooming in like that, so we could see that it was still Magnus' turn. Because I was looking at the camera work, I was like, all the pieces look like they're on the same squares that Magnus left them on. So it is his turn, and he'll need to figure out what to do. He traded queens, and now he needs to figure out his next step here. Because
I love rook a8. And I have so many stories like that. Sometimes even as a GM, I'll come back to the board and I won't be able to tell what my opponent did, and it's so embarrassing. You're holding the pen in your hand, and I'm like, what move was played? And it takes me like 10, 15 seconds. I got to look over my opponent's score sheet. Like, what kind of a GM are you? You can't even tell how the position changed. Well, and of course, I told that story many times about trying to make 2 moves in a row.
Well, I have a great story for you. It involves Yasser Seirawan. And we see that on the ticker that Magnus has yet to win the World Cup. It's pretty much the only thing he hasn't won. So he's looking to do that, of course. But Yasser at the World Team Championship in Ningbo, China, he was playing against Ilya Smirin. And Smirin was walking around. Yasser was thinking pretty much forever. And Smirin comes back to the board and just makes a move. But Yasser hadn't moved yet. So Yasser looks at him and is like, Ilya, I believe the rules of chess stipulate that I get to make a move before you make another. And it was this hilarious situation.
That's such a Yasser way to phrase it.
In a very tense moment during the World Team Championship final round. And it was just so hilarious. Of course, Yasser, came up with just a very articulate way of saying, hey, my move, buddy.
So graceful. Wow, that's awesome. That's hilarious. Yeah, Ilya, this does remind me that Sam Geller made two moves in a row in Tilburg, and they wheeled the champagne in, and Johan Hjartarson was there.
Oh my gosh, Yasser is just an absolute gem. He's a legend.
God, I love Yasser.
So many good Yasser stories that
Yasser is the best.
Oh, wow.
Yasser is honestly the best. And I can say that just, and I know everybody will agree with me. Oh, God.
Fun times.
Yasser phrases, he has the best way to phrase things. And, oh man, the stories and just the places this guy has been, it's one of a kind.
You mean like Mar del Plata?
With the Gligorich. Our Gligorich. And then the way he says the names of the players is like you want to be there in 1965 in Curacao. You want to be there when Tal beats Fischer and Smyslov beats Geller and Karpov.
It's really like the movie Midnight in Paris. It's just like what Yasser's stories turn into that. You want to be taken back in time and, as you said, meet these players in Tilburg or in Avro 1938 or
Avro tournament. Max Urba. Yeah, and he's just amazing. So, in any case, bro, that was even a little bit before Yasser's time, but
I'm just adding one to your list of places in your jokes.
Oh yeah, I have a running joke like Tilburg 1684. King Louis the 16th was made the first move in Greco's game.
Gosh. Yeah, that Yasser knew who the NN was playing Greco in the first games of the database.
I had this stream where I was investigating some chess history books, and I was investigating a 16th century feud between Rai Lopez, the person who wrote a book on openings, and this is very little known, but there were about 7 or 8 chess books that were written in the 1500s and they mostly focused on opening analysis. And this guy Damiano, who is known for e4, e5, knight f3, f6, and that is one of the great injustices of the sort of opening names, is that Damiano, he didn't advocate for f6 to be played. He was the first person to refute it. And Rai Lopez, who had this feud going with Damiano over whether the Italian is better than the Rai Lopez, I'm serious. You literally read passages in their books. You don't think of people in the 1500s engaging in this kind of trolling, and that's exactly what they do. Rai Lopez would say, and contrary to what Damiano says, and then in Damiano's manuscript, and I think Rai Lopez was just jealous that Damiano was first on the scene. Anyways, I don't know why I'm going on this tangent. See, the mention of Yasser's name just makes me think about chess history and all that awesome stuff.
I must admit, that is a particularly amazing story of 16th century beef between players. And back in the day, they used pamphlets, right? They didn't have the internet to go tweet. They were like, let me create a little pamphlet here to talk about my dissatisfaction with Damiano. And
in the next break, I'll grab the book where that passage is, and maybe I'll read a passage from Ray Lopez's book. If the opportunity presents itself, of course. We're watching the World Cup. I get it. And Duda, by the way, he's got knight d2.
Whoa. You were mentioning this sacrifice earlier on. Even after the queen tree, it's not so ridiculous. Duda says it's not ridiculous at all. That's in fact what I'm aiming for. And Danya, you know what would be cool if Magnus doesn't take.
Right.
He's like, I'll leave that there. My bishop is actually really strong, and I don't need to capture your rook just yet, because that does make White's life a lot easier.
Right, and the other thing that should be pointed out, the other advantage of sacking the exchange is, you get rid of the light squared bishop, so your king becomes entirely safe without moving. It's all because you can ensure the safety of your king by surrounding it with pieces or by removing potential attackers. And now the light squares are no longer weak because there's nothing to exploit them. So that should also be mentioned. Now, after bishop e7, I mentioned that White can take on g5, and I wasn't necessarily thrilled with that. Maybe a move like rook a6 is more testing, or rook a7, something to that effect. So White should not be tied to material here. And I think everybody understands by this point that in the Marshall, you can't make your decisions solely on the basis of what gives you the most material advantage.
Well, actually, let me sort of make or illustrate that point that you just made, where in that line that you're just looking at with bishop e4, knight e4, you mentioned rook a6, which is a nice shot. So maybe instead of playing bishop e7, instead of reacting, we should play rook a8, because we can give up our bishop on d6, as well win the bishop on c1 with a rook a1 after the trades.
That's a great idea. Rook a8 again, and now it works for a different reason than before. If knight d6, you go rook a1. And now White's worse. So White probably should take on g5 at some point. But I never I'm always biased against these positions. I just feel like when a pair of rooks has been exchanged, even if you have 3 pawns for the exchange, it's always very hard to play. It's easy to lose control of the situation if you're White, if you let the rook infiltrate.
Right. So. It just seems like Black will, even if White may have a little bit advantage according to the engine, you got a couple pawns, it seems like Black always has the play needed to hold on at the very least, and actually can turn the tables if White's not careful.
That is absolutely the case, and move 20 has been made. They both have spent, Magnus has spent about half of his time, so it doesn't seem like time will be an issue in this game, but so many important decisions that both players have to make in a very short span.
And a good question actually coming in from the chat. So in this line, just to actually go through this one more time, bishop e4, knight e4, bishop e7, the question was asked after bishop e7, rook a6, why not rook a8 now? But things have changed. So we always need to take this into account. It seems like rook takes c6 is not so possible because of this rook a1 threat, but the c6 pawn is essential to defending that knight on d5. So you can get away with rook takes c6. And after the bishop takes on d5, rook takes on c1, you have to evaluate this whole mess now where it's 2 pawns and a knight for a rook, but also the presence of opposite colored bishops, which could mean the f7 pawn is in some danger, whereas the bishop on e7 doesn't have anything to target just yet. It's a really interesting position. So it's worth the question of, should this be explored? However, rook a8 doesn't just transpose the earlier line because the c6 pawn can be captured.
I think that's a very good explanation, and moves changed based on the position they're played in. So that must be factored in by Magnus as he contemplates whether or not to take this exchange. And we've contemplated whether or not to take a break, and I think we've decided that we will. And Fide is rooting for Carlsen.
Yes, he is.
In a weird way.
It's probably going to come down to a tie break because the drawing tendency in this position is very high.
Although, Fabiano, you have sat across from Magnus more than pretty much anybody else on this planet. What does that look tell you about how Magnus is feeling?
Well, I don't think that he's super worried. So I guess the question is rook c3, rook e7. I mean, it actually looks pretty good for White. I'm wondering how black would approach this. You can play rook d1, you can try to attack the d pawn, but white has rook f7 and rook f4. But it's only 2 pawns, so if we trade d and d pawns, it might very likely be a draw anyway.
So could black try maybe c5?
Yeah, black could try c5 here, but then rook g4 actually wins. So you can't do that immediately.
Because knight comes around and wins the pawn.
Yeah. Or king h8, which would be really sad.
That's how the game's going to end. Magnus generally misses these things.
Well, he might be trying to calculate some line like that, where Fabian is saying, if you can trade off the pawns, then black shouldn't be in too much danger. Still has to, make sure that you don't blunder anything. But white is clearly with the upper hand at this point.
Yeah, I don't think Magnus likes positions where he has no chances to win at all, and here there are no chances to win. He's just defending. Although I think that black is really not going to find any winning chances in this position. He could also try f6 to try to save the pawn, but then I guess rook e7, because knight c6, rook c3 seems like a slightly better version for black than the other position. Yeah, and here king g8, there might be some knight d7 stuff. So
yeah, this seems very nasty.
Right, does not look pleasant at all. Well, I sort of foreshadowed this because I said, Bobby, you spent a lot of time across the board from Magnus. This time it will be Jan Nepomniachtchi, but it's time, Fabi. You've known about this for a while, but the public hasn't. I've known about it, and I'm very excited to announce to the world that you, Fabiano Caruana, will be officially joining the chess.com broadcast team for the World Championship. So you're stuck with me today. You're going to be stuck with me for a lot longer in November and December.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
That's all you have to say? You're just looking forward to it, just gonna,
Yeah, spending a month with you, covering the games, that'll be fun.
There's nothing better than that, is there?
Well,
Robert,
it seems
you're just great company.
Oh, well, look at you being all nice. Just because we have company. Usually, if Fabiano's not here, you're just giving me a lot of slack, telling me horrible puns. But it is extremely exciting that Fabiano Caruana will be joining the commentary team for the World Championship to hear his insights, where, honestly, you have some of the best out there because you've played Magnus in the championship match, which, well, was just extremely grueling experience.
Yeah, it's pretty unique. You don't really know what you're getting into until you're actually sitting down there for the first game. So yeah, it's definitely a new experience. I mean, no matter how many tournaments the top players played, it doesn't really compare to playing a match. The unique level of stress and tension there is, and how difficult it is.
For sure. And I think the players here are under a lot of pressure. In particular, Duda is, because he needs to make his way to the candidates. And if he beats Magnus in this game, he's there. And if not, he will have a second chance, because if Magnus ends up winning this match, the third, fourth place match will also determine the second candidate qualifier, whether it's Fedoseev, who's rooting for Magnus, or if it will be Duda, who, of course, is rooting for himself in all matches. So there's a lot still left on the table here. And Magnus has won it all, except for this World Cup. So I wonder, how much does this World Cup mean to him? He seems to be taking it very seriously.
Yeah, I think this is one of the tournaments that he really wants to win, because it's the only format where he's not won yet. So he probably considers it one of the last hurdles. And I think that was the reason he played this, because I mean, he doesn't have to qualify for anything. So he's the only player in the world, besides Rajabov, who had no reason to play this as a qualification. So I think that was his reason. He just wanted to win it, to have that under his belt as well.
I mean, do you think part of it might also be, during COVID, there was a lot of talk of Magnus kind of being in a slump and all that jazz. Do you think he tries to shut that out completely, or does that serve as kind of a motivating force behind maybe not his participation in the tournament, but the kind of spirit with which he's been playing.
Yeah, I didn't realize that he was considered to be in a slump. I thought his results were still pretty good. And most of the online events he was playing, he was getting to the final and winning a number of them. So I guess he does have a the standards for him are very high. So he's expected to win many, if not most, of the events he plays. But I still thought he was doing pretty well. Um, but yeah, he hasn't played too many over the board events, and the last one he played was Wednesday, and he wasn't really close to winning that tournament, so that was probably a very big disappointment for him. So maybe he wanted to get some over the board success in.
Right, and this format is very different than your traditional round robins or even your Swiss events, right? Because you only get 2 games of classical chess in, and of course, Fabiano, your experience here wasn't so pleasant, but I mean, what's that dynamic like where you know that if you played maybe a 10-game match against a low-rated opponent, that would obviously favor you, but in these short spurts, kind of how do you adjust your mentality?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask because I didn't do very well. But it is true that any player, um, no matter the difference in rating between two opponents, any match can go in a surprising direction because all it really takes is one mistake. You don't really get second chances too often, and if you do, you definitely don't get third chances. So it's a lot of things can happen. We saw a lot of the favorites left pretty quickly. Okay, Levon, of course, for totally different reasons, not related to chess at all.
Right.
But also Ali Reza and Anish, and a lot of players exited the tournament way sooner than we expected. So there's some randomness. Of course, it's not there's not so much randomness because we still see the final players are all extremely strong. Um, and most of the players in this tournament are very strong, but there is that element of randomness where anyone can exit at any moment.
Let's see what decision Magnus made in his game because he was getting uncomfortably low on time. All right, let me refresh to get the latest position.
Just a couple moves have been played. The f7 pawn is no longer for this board, and nor is the c3 pawn.
So he's gone for, in this critical position, he did decide against f6. He took the pawn, went back to c2, and king g8 is on the board.
Which is similar to what we were looking at, right? We were looking at rook d1 rather than rook c2, but it doesn't change so much. White still is likely to play like rook to f4 maybe, or also the rook could stay on the 7th.
I was thinking maybe rook c7.
Yeah. So the question is c5. Is that?
Here d5 and then
Yeah, d5 rook d1. Let's say
knight g4.
knight g4. Yeah.
The fork on f6 doesn't look.
Well, what if I just ignore?
Knight e3.
Oh,
No, somehow this. Ooh, that's another one. Yeah.
Okay, maybe rook d2 was a better way of setting up instead of rook d1.
Yeah, so it avoids the fork threat after knight g4.
Knight g4 is still annoying because knight on f6 could be, could start picking up a lot of pawns, but maybe the h pawn isn't so crucial. Maybe black can try to push and knight f6, king f8.
Three results might be possible here, although
Yeah,
of course white probably has a draw in his pocket.
it's a very strange position because black can sort of try and choose how to go for, do I want to trade the c and d pawns and be in a situation where I have a knight and the 3 pawns, the king side versus the rook and the 1 pawn. Of course, the presence of the rooks helps white's chances because the rook and the knight together can attack a piece in a way that just the knight alone won't be able to. But Fabi, I guess question for you here is, this is a pretty atypical type of position, but what kind of study do you top players do? Like, in the live position, like, do you have positions similar to this from puzzles and positions you've looked at, or were your instincts just on the spot here?
I think this type of position is just going to be pure calculation, because there aren't really any positional considerations here. It's just about calculating move by move stuff. And it does bear some similarities to some positions I've seen from some other openings, but yeah, it's not something you can really study besides just training your calculation.
Right. And I guess I was sort of asking, like, do you train positions with knight, rook in 3 against 2 rooks in 1, sort of a similar end game that we're seeing here? Obviously not straight from the opening, but this type of position.
I don't, but maybe somebody does.
Donna, do you?
Oh, all the time. I do. Right after the commentary, I turned to Dvoretsky's English manual, page 455, and I just tackle the problems. But yeah, I think the decision between rook f4, rook c7 is occupying Duda's mind. But a case could be made for both. I mean, rook f4, c5 is a pretty devilish trap with rook g4, but how would Magnus handle this?
That's one of the nice things about rook f4 is that it stops black's most obvious idea, and that's a good thing. Like if black doesn't have any useful ideas, then white can eventually start to push the kingside pawns and create some potential mating net on the kingside. But black doesn't have any obvious ideas. You can't really attack d4 because c6 is hanging, and you can't push c5 so easily. I guess you can play king g7. It still doesn't threaten c5 because you have the same issue.
Right. So maybe something like h4, and again, if c5, then rook g4.
Yeah.
And
yeah, black would probably
there's also
black can't do
e3
this.
in there. Yeah. Oh.
Magnus does not look happy. I don't know if he has a migraine from a long chess tournament or if he's just really unhappy about his position, but he does not look pleased.
So migraine from your commentary.
You can't hear that, so you can suffer your
How
migraine.
do you know that?
But he really doesn't look happy at all.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess, Fabi, you played the guy so many times. When you see a position like this and you see his facial reactions, do you think that he's worried about his chances here, that he could lose this game, or do you feel that he has everything under control?
Yeah, I wouldn't read too much into his body language right now. He doesn't seem unhappy. If he's completely lost, then he might start to get very despondent. But here he just looks kind of concentrated. Well, not anymore.
What was he up to? It was like doing some deep cleaning of that square centimeter of the cloth.
So the human vacuum, just trying to sweep away everything that was in front of him.
Okay, let me refresh because I think rook c7 has been played.
It has indeed.
And a big moment here for black. So we were looking c5 immediately, or was it?
Yeah, I realized c5, knight d3 is possible, but then rook d1, it might still be possible for black to do that.
Wait, can you throw in?
Oh, or yeah, cd4 is possible actually.
Ooh, that's a very nasty one. Then white has to think about. Okay, then rook d7, but obviously that's not desirable. So d5, what are the other candidate moves?
It's probably only, unless white just wants to make a draw and take on c5. So if white wants to win this, then d5 should be the move.
Mm-hmm.
Can you play knight g4 and give up d4 to get h7? And knight f6? Or take with... No.
Or you want it to take...
I would take right away because your king can't escape.
Oh, that's a very good point. Because if your king runs to d8, there's going to be this fork. So you have nothing to lose from this.
Yeah, rook d7 probably, and rook d1, I guess.
King or h. I
When
don't
you
even
start
know how to
pushing
do
the
this.
g pawn, probably not enough time. But what if you start g4? Wait a minute. Oh no, that's. You know what I'm trying to make work is something like d3, g5, and some stalemate idea, but I can't quite find a way to make it work.
Maybe this should be a draw. Black will have to play something like rook c6, but no, it actually looks very dangerous.
Yeah, I would be
Let's see.
afraid.
Or there's rook d2 instead of rook c6. Maybe that's the right move.
Well, I just switched back because Magnus has 2 minutes. We're about to see if he plays c5.
Not an easy choice. Can you?
5 moves to make. And
do?
he hasn't played
H5.
h5.
Wow. Okay.
Ooh, that does seem pretty loose, but
The good news
So
it takes away
knight
g4.
d7, is that an option for white? It looks like a very serious option.
And can you play rook d1 or d2? I don't know which makes a difference at all.
maybe d5.
Yeah, d5 is interesting.
But then I have
And
rook
then-
c2, right?
And then,
yeah, this should be fine for black.
something's been played. And it is
Knight f3, maybe? No, knight d7.
okay, it's been played.
Yeah, I went forward.
So maybe
Now
he'll
this
just
idea of doubling.
play rook d1, knight f6, and although black doesn't have to take on d4, so black might even just ignore that pawn and try to go for f2, because once f2 falls, then h2 is also likely to fall.
That's true. Because the pawn h5 is no less susceptible to attack, but it does take away the g4 square from the knight. So that's a pretty big thing to prevent the defense of the f2 pawn, as you're saying.
Yeah, but this is an important idea. If he doesn't hop on that train, yeah, knight f6 and king f7, knight c5 are both very unpleasant.
So let's see when rook d1.
Yep.
I can see when I zoomed in.
Very confident. Yeah, we might see some sort of a perpetual very soon.
There's no. Okay, white can play rook d7 and then force a draw like that. I mean, knight f6 and rook d7. But I'm not sure. I feel like Duda is ambitious, and he usually doesn't take the easy way out. So I think that he'll continue playing this.
And there's no real danger that he's going to lose this game, right? Sometimes being overly ambitious, you pay the price and lose games where you shouldn't, but it seems like it's unlosable.
Well, yeah. Here, the thing is, if he decides to take on h5, then it is a position with 3 results.
Right.
And knight f6, king f8. So rook d7 is the bailout because it sets up the perpetual. And and knight h5 keeps it very interesting. Rook d2 and maybe h4, take king h3.
Wow.
It's still very likely a draw, but it's a fight.
Yeah, I guess black can go after that d4 pawn, and that could be problematic if the c pawn gets rolling. But on the other side, the h and g pawns can start rushing up the board, and black needs to be careful himself.
Yeah, knight f4. Maybe he should first kick the king to g4 and then attack the d pawn.
I guess black could probably take on f4, but who would want?
But here
the
his
F
king
and
is
H
cut off.
pawns?
So this is a very, very dangerous version for him. The king is cut off on the last rank, and king g5 comes. This might just be losing.
Right. Yeah, no, there's no need for that. Okay, so knight f6, king f8 has been played, and we're about to see the moment of truth.
Okay, big choice here.
Does he go for knight h5?
To me, and you told me not to read body language, but looking at his body language, it seems like he wants to play for a win here. Like he has that look to him and the way he's perched over the board, but maybe he doesn't want to take any undue risk.
Well, he's got 3 minutes to decide. 2 moves to make until the time control.
Okay.
I wonder if Magnus is praying on the inside. Please don't go knight takes h5.
Well, he can repeat once. Oh, actually, no, he can't because king's going to e8. Never mind.
Right. So the draw line is specifically rook d7. Knight h7 would be asking for trouble, probably.
I don't think Magnus is too worried though. His position doesn't. It doesn't seem like he's walking a tightrope here. So I don't think he's too concerned if Duda decides to take on h5 and play on.
Yeah, Magnus looks kind of bored now, if you ask me.
He's got that. All right, let's get on with this already. Look.
Yeah, well, just a couple moves left until the time control. At the corner of my eye, was peeking at the choreographed game, and he takes on h5. He's playing for more.
Wow. I think Magnus is a bit surprised at that. I don't know. Maybe I'm over psychologizing. So now there's a choice for black. Does he take on d4? Is there any case to be made for that move?
I think that he should. I mean, he's probably going to win that d4 pawn anyway. So you want to get rid of the 3 pass pawns. And after rook d4, like you're anyway going to try to play rook d2 and rook f2 next. So the only thing is you might not be able to achieve it anymore. White might play knight f6, and then the knight comes back to square to protect that pawn.
Yep, and he's gone rook d2. And h4 is important here to create a hiding space for the king. That will be the time control move.
You could give up both pawns, but which will still probably be a draw, like knight f4. But then that's not a winning attempt at all. If he played like this, he's probably going to play h4.
Well, Magnus's game, this happened: h4, rook f2, and king h3.
Okay.
Apparently, he's thinking.
Yeah, they reached move. That was White's 41st move, so it seems like they are now going to take a bit of time, take a breather, because there's stress of reaching the time control. And to my eyes, it still looks like White has some outside shot of winning this game, but Fabiano seems completely unconcerned and thinks that Magnus has this.
I'm generally unconcerned because it's not my game. But I would bet serious amounts of money on this being a draw eventually. It's just so likely because I think we're going to see a trade of D and C pawns at some point, and then White has the 2 pawns and a symbolic edge. I guess White is the only one who can really play that for a win, but it should be a draw.
How many moves is this game going to last though? Because Duda doesn't seem like he's going to make Magnus' life easy. I could see him playing this out forever. No, maybe.
It could last a long time. Yeah. But I'm wondering if Black can play rook h2, king g4, and then rook h to d2. And
White.
But yeah, now White might start to go for mating.
Or not. Nope.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe knight f4 and then the king comes to f5 to an f6. Or first king f5. I don't know which one is.
Yeah, this keeps the options open of both.
Wait a second. There is a mating net. It's very simple. Rook takes d4, knight f6, and then king g6, and then or king e6. I'm going to try to checkmate you at some point very soon. Uh-oh.
Can White? Okay, Black can maybe try rook g2.
Then g4.
This is really scary. G5 is coming. Oh no, yeah.
There's a mate threat. Black can't take the pawn.
Magnus brought his rook back to f7, it looks like, in the game. So he is worried about the checkmate, and that's why he brings his rook back. I'm telling you, there's definitely chances for White in this game. seems not that easy to my eye for Black to just defend everything. But I'm going to say that Magnus is going to show it's no problem. And that you were right, Fabiano. I don't say it often. I know. I told you I was going to ignore you when you joined the broadcast today. You are right. My bad. You can celebrate, it's okay.
This is a great moment.
No celebration. Just
I'm gonna make a very bold prediction. I think
that?
Duda is gonna play Rook C8 and not trade. Make
super
myself
bold
look good.
Yeah.
I really am going out on a limb here.
Well, he played Rook C8, so you got your wish.
Yeah, it's sort of this post 40th move lull in the action, and yeah, these games, they could go on forever. They could also end very, very quickly. I mean, it really, really depends. And I had a question on a slightly it is related to the topic of long games, but Fabi, do you think the 30 move draw roll, like if that wasn't there, would we have sort of a epidemic of quick draws in, did that happen in past World Cups? I don't remember.
I don't remember either, but I don't think that. I think you would probably have a few more draws that would end before 30 moves. But if players want to play safe, then usually they find a way, and very often in these formats, you see a lot of action no matter what, because players at some point need to play for win. And if they don't want to go for a tiebreak, then they might have no incentive to play safe. They might go for crazy complications, or they might play fighting openings. So I don't think that we would see a huge difference, but we might see some difference in terms of, sometimes players get scared in certain positions, and if both players are afraid of losing in a very complicated, but more or less balanced position, then a draw offer might end the game because neither player wants to risk it.
Very strange question, Fabi. Sorry to interrupt, but it's going to sound weird. But which top player would you say is least afraid of losing?
The least afraid of losing.
Yeah.
I guess I would. My first question would be what do you consider a top player? Like what's the rating cutoff?
Let's go for like, I don't know, 2,700 plus, but we could also say 2,750 plus. So you can choose. I don't care.
I would put Duda up there. He would be, I don't know if he would be the number one pick, but he would definitely be near the top in terms of players who are very fighting players. I don't know if there's players who are terrified of losing because everyone has had to deal with a lot of losses to get to that level. But for players who don't play quite as safe, then Duda is definitely up there. I mean, probably Alireza I would also put up there, which might also be because of his age. Usually, players who are a bit younger tend to fight more. So yeah, but it's hard to pick just one person.
Seems like the chat is rooting for Dubov here.
Dubov, yeah.
As
yeah, that's a good pick too. Yeah.
And I guess one, the World Champion Challenger this time around, Nepo, he seems to play a lot of fighting chess. I don't know if that means he's afraid or not of losing, but his style is definitely combative. So
yeah, Jan is also a very, very combative player.
So Duda, you say he is unafraid. He is going toe to toe with the world champion, and he's been in these two games at least every bit his equal. Obviously, Magnus the stronger and higher rated of the two, but in these mini match formats, Duda's proven that he can withstand the pressure, at least for now. So I guess the result isn't in the books yet, but Fabiano, if this goes to a rapid tiebreak tomorrow, what do you rate Duda's chances as?
I think realistically, probably 35%. I think that's pretty much fair because Magnus is really, really good in these formats, especially in rapid chess, he's very, very difficult to beat. So he's definitely a favorite, but 2-game match, maybe 35% is even a bit underestimating Duda's chances.
Wow.
I mean, it's a 2-game match, well, potentially 2-game match, so anything can happen. All that needs to happen is that Magnus has, has 1 hour where he's not playing at his very best, and he could be an underdog. Of course, he should be a pretty big favorite, but in this format, I think anything can happen.
Don, does that surprise you? That 35%?
I mean, given the way Duda has played in this tournament, it totally makes sense. I'm thinking of, I went on a mental tangent, and probably the answer to this is obvious, but I'm blanking. Has Magnus ever been? Of course, he's not lost a single time this tournament, but has he even been close to being lost? Has he had a single lost position?
Well, he lost to
Yesipenko.
But I meant more in the classical portion. But yeah, that's true. He did lose in the tiebreaker, the first game.
Didn't he have a tough position against Tari at one point? Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, there were some fears, I think.
Well, in the first game,
I actually forgot about Yesipenko.
In the first game with Tari, he wasn't better for most of the game, but he was never really worse or risking losing. I don't think he's been in trouble in the classical, from what I remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there was that quick turnaround with Tari where one move is all it takes. Magnus. It feels like so long ago. It's like a different era.
This tournament has been going on for weeks, and it started early July. Never ending.
It's like those old candidates tournaments, 2 months. Bronstein would win at 22 out of 34.
That's what you want, Fabiano, right? These tournaments, instead of being 11 rounds, or 9 rounds, 14 or 13 rounds, like Vicon say, you want it to be 25 to 35, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm dreaming of.
And they'd move location to location. Zagreb, London, Paris, those candidates tournaments that.
I only did that once. There was one tournament. It was called the Grand Slam in 2012, where it went from Sao Paulo, Brazil, to Bilbao, Spain, and there was a week break in between. So it was a very long tournament with a strange break.
Wait, what do you mean you did it once? You just did it at the candidates. You had a year-long break between halves.
But it was in the same place.
That's true. That's true. Just in a totally different world and over a year later.
Isn't that weird that you got to pack and then you're going to the same tournament, but you're flying across the world to continue that tournament? I don't know.
Yeah, it was strange.
Well, we get to see faces here and players that maybe don't take part in the top level events. And Magnus had an interview earlier, and I think Grishuk said the same, that it's easier to play familiar faces rather than some of these younger talents or just lower people. Do you actually like playing people that you haven't played before? Because we most regularly see you play against Magnus and against Anish and Levon and all the top players, but do you enjoy the new opponents that you face in a tournament of this nature, or like Isle of Man and things like that?
If they don't beat me, I do. I mean, I was excited to play Jumabayev because I'd never played him before, but I wasn't too excited at the end of it.
And now he's, your mortal enemy. So I never want to speak to him again. So Renat, if you're watching, we're upset with you here. But on a serious note, of course, results. Let's be result agnostic for a second, and let's just say it's any old tournament. Is it enjoyable to kind of face new people?
Yeah, it is. I actually enjoy open tournaments more so than the regular closed tournaments with the players who I've played against extensively over the last decade. So that's why Isle of Man is something I'm looking forward to, the Grand Swiss. You get a diverse group of opponents. You also get a slightly different, um, you know, you players are playing for something a bit different where to actually get success there, you have to win a lot of games. You can't just win 2 games and expect that it will get you near the top. You need to win uh, most of your games, and so yeah, it's a very interesting challenge.
All I'm hearing, honestly, is I like winning. And in an event like Isle of Man, like you tied for first last time, you won many games. Whereas when you play in your super tournaments, there are a lot of draws. Then if you win 3 games, you win the tournament. So I see what's happening here. I see through you, Fide. Oh gosh.
Well, I think they're going to go down. Ooh, rook d8, king e5, rook e8. So knight g6 here would have led to that draw that we had discussed with king f6 and takes the knight. But Duda continues. I mean, this is shades of Fedoseev. He keeps on trying to keep the game alive. And there are some landmines that Magnus has to avoid. So, for example, after king f6, rook e6, if you go to the 5th rank, if you go to G5, you get mated. Rook G4, king F5, G4, king E5, and rook E6 is mate. That's actually very nice.
Wow.
I think if you go to F5, well, this is completely unnecessary. I think you should step back, but Duda wants to go for this position and probably play it for another 8 centuries. But it should be a draw.
Doesn't look that obvious. When we say should be a draw, we have the eval bar and everything, but you often want that exact bailout where, okay, worst comes to worst, like we were showing earlier in one of those variations, where Magnus could give up his rook for those remaining 2 pawns. Like that was an easy draw from Magnus's perspective. So there still is a bit of life left because there's no clear-cut solution for Magnus just yet.
Maybe king d6 is that solution. And try to cling to that c pawn. Of course, white could repeat, but I guess Duda wants rook e6, king d7, rook g6, and rook g7 is a threat. Nothing seems to be entirely that clear-cut. Everything is a draw, but it's not as clear-cut as Magnus would like it, and he's down to 8 minutes. So there's a lot of intrigue still remaining in that game. And yeah.
Easy to make a mistake here. Just put your king on the wrong square, or not get your d4 rook back in time in case of that rook g6 idea as you were showing before. It could be a problem for Magnus, especially as you mentioned because of the clock.
And if I saw this game without knowing who the opponents were, and I knew it was Duda against Carlsen, I would say Magnus was white. Duda is doing what Magnus does to other people, i.e., it's a draw. You keep trying to find it, but it keeps finding ways to prolong the game to create new problems, and it gets so irritating that the chances of a mistake keep on rising, even if you keep defending perfectly. So this has been an incredible showing by Duda, even if this game ends in a draw. Definitely putting massive heat on the world champion here.
There's also not one clear train of thought as we see Magnus hovering over the board, and there goes king d6. Where the king could have gone to f6 and closer to the passed pawns to try to stop their progress, or as was just played, king back to d6.
Okay, they're repeating moves.
Okay, I guess Duda's just going to make the draw?
I don't know. I mean, if you're making the draw, then you might as well play knight g6. There's absolutely no... I think he's going to go rook e6.
He's thinking.
He's going to go rook e6. Jan is going to go rook e6, rook g6.
He's got some good schooling because you always repeat. Don't go to 3-time repetition, but repeat, gain some time, try to figure it out. But you think he's going rook e6 for sure?
Not for sure. I mean, of course, it's Magnus, so you could repeat, but I'm voting rook e6. Because the problem now is it's a path of no return. They've already repeated twice. So if he goes rook d8 again, you're gonna get 3-time repetition.
Right.
And I feel like he's gone all this way. He sees rook e6, rook g6. It's a pretty simple idea. He wants to go all or nothing. He wants to win this game.
And he looks ready to move, but then also not entirely sure.
Well, he's definitely vacillating. I think it's very clear. He's weighing the options. He might do either, but
I think he's just doing some mental math, calculating his odds in the rapid.
Right. It really, yeah. You could make a case for either decision being correct. I don't think white's risking after rook e6, but it's easy for me to say that.
Right. And, we don't have to deal with the consequences.
Play Magnus, yeah. Carlsen.
I said it half jokingly, but he might be assessing, do I have more chances in this game right now to win, or could things even go wrong with that C pawn that's still there? And do I want to conserve some more energy for tomorrow's tiebreak if they just make a draw? So there's so much to take into account here that's not just on the board in front of them.
Right. And I think against almost anybody else, it would go rook e6 quickly, but it is Magnus. And it's not a bad thing to, say, well, I am playing Magnus, because it is true that Magnus is probably going to find all the best moves. So you can just kind of assume that in most cases. And rook e6 played.
There it is.
Amazing. I'm honestly mad props to Duda for doing this.
He's fighting. And Fabiano said it. Duda is one of the most combative players at the top level.
Mm-hmm.
And Magnus is trying to figure out where to bring the king. King d7 feels natural because you're not stepping into any knight forks. If the rook were to move from e6, the knight would land there. If it's on c7 or c5, then knight e6 will be checked. That could be a bit scary. But king d7 has the drawback, as you were pointing out, Danya, of rook g6 threatening rook g7 check to try to promote that pawn.
Right. Yeah, both moves have clear flaws to them, and that's a very annoying situation when we see why both moves could end up being bad. And what always seems to happen is Murphy's Law. Like the evil of one of you play the move you think is the lesser evil, but then the drawback seems to manifest itself, and you wish you'd played the other move. Magnus is going to take some time here. This is a super important decision.
And it's funny because both players are deliberating. It's a really critical moment. And from Magnus, I still don't get the sense that he knows 100% this is going to be a draw.
Oh,
Even
yeah,
if
no.
the eval bar says zeros, he's not thinking in that way. He's just trying to think, okay, what threats can do to drum up here? What do I have to look out for? And as you were the first to show, like that rook g6 idea doesn't look that comfortable. And Magnus himself, he's been putting his hand on his head quite a bit, and he has not looked happy throughout this game.
Nope. It just has that ring to it. And, I think people still fall into this misconception. Of course, everybody knows Magnus has access to the eval bar during the game. But I think there's still this idea, to echo your point, that people think, oh, Magnus knows it's a draw, and he's just looking for the way to do it. He doesn't know it's a draw. He does not know the eval. And when you don't know the evaluation, it's very hard to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who doesn't know the evaluation when you're seeing the bar indicate, because that gives you a sense of reassurance. And even if you don't think you have it, you absolutely are operating with a sense of reassurance. Like, find the right moves to draw. This is a completely added wrinkle, even for the world champion. It creates a lot of pressure.
For sure. It's easy to sit at home with your engine on, looking at the result of every single move, saying, it's fine. This gave white a little bit of advantage, but that's not what happens when you're in the hot seat yourself. You're sitting there looking at things. And, we talked about fear earlier in the day. Not that the players are really that scared, but they see ideas for themselves, they see ideas for their opponent, and you want to neutralize those. And sometimes you get too fixated on a specific idea, and you have to be sharp to not fall into any traps. So rook g6 was in fact played. Rook g7 check is devastating. If white had a free move, rook g7 ends the game. So even rook d6 fails to that very same move. Rook g7 check, forcing the rooks off the board. The h pawn becomes a g pawn. The g pawn becomes a queen, and that would be that.
Right. And the last thing I'll say on the topic is, I wish that sometimes people did, it's easy to point out the blunders, but, a lot of the times these players find crazy only moves. And it is that when nobody says anything, when Magnus finds the top computer move in some position or the only defensive move. So I would encourage people to pay attention to that as well. Of course, it's entertaining to watch the computer, and we all do that as well. But, there's a good reason why these players are at the top of the game. So anyways, we'll see what happens. Let's check. Well, the Magnus game is entering the time scramble phase very soon. And Duda is contemplating his options after king e7.
And my big question is, after rook takes c6, is rook d6 just holding everything together? And I think the answer is yes, because the h6 pawn is a little bit too far away from that knight on f4. You can't defend like a bishop can. So it looks like black's going to be able to snag that one.
Yeah, that's a forced draw. It's rook c7, rook d7, and you have. Wait a minute. No. There's some knight checks here that are pretty scary.
And knight g6 is scary at first glance.
But it's a draw, obviously, like king f6, I guess.
Right.
King c5.
And it does look like he took on c6 based on.
Yeah, this game's actually going to end pretty soon if Magnus plays rook d6, I think. And he will.
He 100% will play rook d6.
Yeah, he will not pass up the opportunity to force a draw. And we might even see a repetition, rook c7, rook c6. Oh, knight g6. Oh, and it's rook. Wait, what is? Is it king d7? That's the drawing move. Yeah. King d7. Mm-hmm. Okay, we got to refresh again here. This will be a draw.
Right, because knight f8 check does fork the king and the rook, but then rook on c6 is hanging. So you'll give up your rook on h7 for the rook on c6. And Duda, he's just looking. He's like, yeah, this is a draw.
Yeah, he's going to offer one right here. 95. He has that. Both of them have that expression. It's about to end in a draw.
Right, so king e6, rook
king
takes.
E6.
And by the way, the Goryachkina game against Kostyuk ended in a draw. A draw was agreed to on that board. So Alexandra Kostyuk is your Women's World Cup champion. She deserves a tremendous amount of praise. She had an amazing event. She just went through without tie breaks, just crushing everybody. She is your deserved champion. That is your chess queen, if you will. So
incredible. Absolutely amazing performance.
I think the tiebreaks still go on, even though the players may be like, oh, can we just split the money, split the difference? There's not anything else at stake besides prize money there, but I guess they go to tiebreaks. They'll have a good time of that. And, well, Duda trying to get his king to help his pawns, but Magnus brought his rook to the long side, and his king's going to come to f7 to step in front of the pawns. You're not making progress.
No, we're going to see, I would imagine, a draw for any second, because the rook has side checks at the right moment, as you indicated. And yeah, you can see the relaxation. And they're going to tie breaks tomorrow. And boy, are those going to be some competitive tie breaks. King g5. And king f7 is important. Otherwise, the king gets to g6. Well, okay. Do we really need a new score sheet for 2 moves?
Exactly the thought that is going through their mind. Like, this is about to be a draw.
Right.
And what move?
Yeah, that reminds me of something. I don't know what to compare that to. Like, it's just not worth the hassle.
It's funny because that was Black's 60th move, which fills out the score sheet. And then it's up to Duda. Are you really going to make Magnus play a little bit more, then have to fill out a new score sheet, write the names down and all that?
Right, write it down. Yeah.
And just say, okay, it's a draw. We don't need to do any more writing here.
Yeah. And
I was waiting for you
thinking.
I was waiting for you to make a pun. You know, the writing's on the wall, but you didn't do it. So
wait, I don't get it.
We were just talking about writing and things like that. So the
writing's
result
on the
is
wall.
Clear. The writing's on the wall. It's going to be a draw. All that good stuff. No. Okay.
Oh, okay. That's even by my standards. That's just. Who do you think I make those kinds of puns?
You called him Andre's brother Nopenko. Or Nosepenko, whatever you said.
Nosepenko, yeah.
Yeah,
yes,
that was the worst ever.
Nosepenko. Right.
Oh, gosh.
It's terrible.
It was. But this game, I think that Magnus, he doesn't have to sweat it out anymore. He knows the draw. Is there a possibility to blunder, though? Like, can Black make some kind of egregious error and lose this game?
Well, White can. White can play King G8. Knight D4. Let's centralize the knight.
Oh, yeah.
And then, okay, draw. All right, fine. I'll give you a draw. I'll be nice now.
How sweet of you.
Yeah. It's funny how even in the way they're making the moves, the game is obviously over, but moves are still being played.
I think we just need another camera angle, honestly.
Right. I don't think we really can make out who's like playing.
Yeah, we like have one camera towards Duda. Can we get one towards Magnus? Is that? Do we have any say over this? I don't think so. I think it's the Fide cameras.
There's a life of its own.
I saw some questions. Is Duda being disrespectful? No, because you're well within your rights to play a position like this out. In fact, Magnus has scored many victories over time by playing positions that should be drawn with proper play, and the opponent makes a mistake. So there's no disrespect here at all. This is, of course, Duda just going for any last hope that he can win this game, but it's going to be a draw. We are going to see tie breaks tomorrow, which Daniel, be excited for.
I am very excited for them, and I'm honestly just incredibly impressed with Duda's fighting spirit in this game. I think it really cannot be emphasized enough how hard it is to gather the courage to constantly keep fighting against Magnus. And at some point, there was a risk of White losing. You could totally envision some scenario where, and with Magnus, all of these are emphasized in your mind. So it's going to be an exciting one. Of course, Magnus is the favorite, but this match has been played on completely equal terms. Duda's preparation is phenomenal. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think it's going to be a close one.
Yeah, the live position, a few moves have been made. The king has gone to h5, and there's a pawn on g4 as well. But I think the simple solution is, as Magnus is showing, just bring your rook around, try to get to the h file, and even sacrifice it for the knight on h4.
Oh, I see another way to lose. If it g5, knight g4, and then rook h3 mate.
Well, here he's going to go rook h3, and after knight h4, he's probably going to. Oh, he's going rook a5. So I thought he might play rook h3 and take the knight on h4.
Fancy schmancy. I don't know where Magnus keeps looking to the side, like expecting someone to do something.
There it is. Draw agreed. And for young Krzysztof Duda, he makes a second draw in a row against Magnus Carlsen, proving to be a tough opponent for him. He actually ended Magnus's unbeaten streak, the 125 game unbeaten streak. So Duda is somebody who you shouldn't take for granted. He is definitely a worthy competitor. And now it heads to rapid time controls, Danya. Anything can happen in that format.
Anything can happen. And as Fabi very astutely put it, it's, Duda needs Magnus to play badly for 1 hour. And that's all it can take. I mean, we talk about the stakes being high in the classical portion. Well, in the rapid portion, they're unbelievably high. I mean, literally just 1 second, one little lapse, and you're out. So it's going to be a very fun one. You certainly don't want to miss it. It's going to be vintage World Cup action.
And the players have great respect for each other. You see them there talking about possibilities, different lines that could have happened. And tomorrow they'll have to gear up for a totally different style of chess, because the rapid time control, you don't have the ability to sit and think for a half hour on a given move. No, your whole game is played with less time than that. So it's going to be a difficult day for the players. They'll have to gather their nerves, make sure that they're feeling ready for that, because it's a really intense matchup between two fantastic players. Of course, Magnus Carlsen, the longtime world champion, the longtime #1 rated player in the world. We don't need to say much more than that. But for Duda, this is a really big opportunity for him. It's not just to defeat Magnus Carlsen head to head, but the candidates. That's on the line, where if he wins in the rapid tomorrow, he makes his way to the 8-player candidates tournament, and who knows what could happen for him there.
Yeah, the importance of making it to the candidates also cannot be overstated for these players. It is the tournament, and it is the path to the World Championship, and that's what's on the mind of these top GMs. It's not, I want to be competitive. It's not, I want to get the participation trophy. It's, they want to become the next world champion, and for very good reason. And that ambition is what drives these games to be as competitive as they are, and what makes them so fun to watch. So it'll be incredible.